have to see it's a trans-rational kind of comprehension that we're trying to get at through rational words and language and
Yeah.
a book.
Well, exactly. And I think what you're pointing to in an important piece is that it's an intellectual exercise. I mean, we can definitely cognize it before we can maybe embody it. That's usually I think the general case. But that's just, obviously that's why spiritual practice and is very important. And, I think there's a lot of conditioning that we have, even in our culture and our postmodern culture, that sometimes we're not even aware of. So I think that it's definitely, I guess, just kind of teasing apart what kind of a postmodern perspective or higher development would actually look like. Yeah.
And it looks pretty cool.
Yeah.
It looks pretty cool the way it sounds. Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, I was just playing with this sort of, because we're overlapping a lot of developmental frameworks, right? We're using states and stages, right? We're using conventional, post-conventional, and then that's the point that the book is to. And now we're talking about post-conventional, but in the spiral dynamics kind of way, right? So then what does that look like? Like, what does, bringing these ideas down to the ground, that's what the post-conventional thing discussion would be about. And I think he points to it at the end where he recognizes what is actually happening as development occurs, which is an internal perspective that can hold more complexity. And it can see larger and larger parts of our reality, right? So it's not that reality itself is changing in terms of, I don't know, just the sort of basic structure of reality, but it's our relationship to it, and it's our ability to hold larger and larger parts of it. So bringing that down to the ground, what does it look like when there's a lot of people who are moving through the construct aware stage, which is what he calls essentially when you realize you have an ego, right? When you start to recognize that, oh, wait, I'm a product of my historical and cultural conditioning, right? I'm not, I can't stand in my identity as self, because my identity as self, I realize, is a big old lie. So what does it look like when people move through that construct aware stage into what is he called? The unitive stage he was pointing to, right? And then what kind of things are created from that place? And it's all conjecture, because at this point it's people sort of amassing the rational way to explain and sort of marshal in people to draw in people to this perspective. But yeah, it's just interesting to overlay all of these different things, right? And then see how they kind of, mix up and turn out.
Yeah, there's kind of 2 points you made, Emily, that the point you're making is that the greater degrees of complexity, it doesn't mean that we exclude, other complexities that we originally had, right? There's a distinction between the second tier and the first tier, where, in some ways, first tier, I think, at least the way I understand it, it does exclude other perspectives. It only sees its perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess it was just the point that you're making about what do you call it? That it was just an interesting point about the world being out there, and that it's not like the world changes, but that our the way we relate to it changes. I think that's what you said.
Yeah.
I guess it was just because that's an interesting point, because in some ways, I don't know, from a non-dual perspective, the world out there is us, right? Like there's and there's an interesting point sometimes in Integral, it seems, is they talk about kind of that the world does in some ways change, because it's not almost just an interpretation. It's more like an actual worldview. Like it's an actual, the world is different in some ways. I guess I'm just, that's
I would be careful also in saying that it's only our perspective that changes, because clearly evolution is happening out there in reality, and there are changes in the structures and the organizations and even the earth around us. And so, yeah, I think again, those are the inside and the outside of the individual and the collective, right? So, I mean, I guess we don't want to bring the quadrants too much into this conversation, but that has something to do with reality out there as opposed to just subjective reality and how we interpret it. So,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Agreed.
Yeah, I just want to bring up that point because it
yes. Not in the way that I didn't mean that in the way that the world is static. And I take that for granted because we're all adopt an evolutionary perspective here. But in the way that and I like the way he described the supermind, right? The last two stages, the overmind in this mind. When you're in overmind, essentially, he was saying, you get lost in emptiness, right? You not lost in it, but you're sort of discovering it, and you to the exclusion of form, right? And then the supermind is actually recognizing that emptiness is container for form, and the essence of form is emptiness, right? So is bringing that down into the ground, and what you guys are pointing to, the actual evolution that's occurring is how well we can integrate those the unchanging, right, the emptiness, into the sort of the world that's always shifting and in flux.
Yeah.
And sorry, what do you mean, Emily, by bringing it to the ground?
He didn't talk about this, but the easiest way for me to understand it is the involution and the evolution, right? That aspect that the top is coming down, right? The sort of everything, the source, right, is trying to penetrate deeper and deeper into form, right? So that's and where those 2 points meet is, that's the easiest way for me to understand it.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
Good.
I think, the simple point that I thought that was great that he brought up is just the sense that development, I guess, is defined as, and I think you already mentioned it, Emily, about the ability to take on more complexity. I wonder what that means, because I've been thinking about that lately because it's very easy to get lost in complexity, right? And when we really want to develop, we have to be willing to, it seems, bear a lot more complexity, and that takes tremendous amount of sophistication, and it's not even just about intellectual, because I mean, you can be very intellectually smart and still not fully embody, I guess, a perspective that is so-called really higher, if that makes sense. I mean, I guess I'm just wondering, how do we kind of actually deal with complexity when we do get at these higher levels, and what does that mean for our lives? I mean, we're very fortunate too, right? We're I think all us three right here, we're very educated, and we live in a nice North American place, and so I mean, we're very fortunate. So it's just good to have that perspective too. But anyway, what would you think about that? Does that ring any bells?
The thing that brought up for me was, and it's interesting because I think one of the things